The beep stopped mid-sound, like someone had cut the air with a knife. 1 second the grocery store was alive with noise, carts rattling, music humming, people talking over each other, and the next second everything froze around one sentence that felt too sharp to belong in a place like this. Your card was declined. The words hung there, heavy and public, and every eye in that checkout line slowly lifted, drawn to the quiet like it was a crime scene. She stood there clutching the can of baby formula with both hands, holding it so tight her knuckles turned pale, like if she loosened her grip even a little, the whole world might fall apart. She was young, but life had already taken something from her. You could see it in her eyes. Not dramatic. Just tired. The kind of tired sleep doesn't fix. Her jacket was thin, frayed at the cuffs, and the zipper didn't go all the way up. A diaper bag sagged off her shoulder, stuffed and worn like it had been through too many hard days. Strapped to her chest was her baby, barely 3 months old, his small face pressed against her, his mouth moving in slow, hungry motions like his body already knew what she was about to lose. The cashier shifted uncomfortably, cleared her throat, and glanced at the screen again as if it might magically change. It didn't. The red letters stayed red. Declined. The woman swallowed and nodded, like she'd expected this. Like she'd practiced for this moment in her head 1,000 times. She slid the card back into her wallet with shaking fingers and whispered, almost to herself, Can you try it again?" Her voice was soft, careful, the voice of someone who didn't want to cause trouble. The cashier tried again. The machine made the same cold sound. Declined. A low sigh rippled through the line behind her. Not sympathy. Annoyance. Time is money, and she was costing them both. Someone tapped a foot. Someone else leaned sideways to see what the holdup was. A man near the back shook his head slowly. The woman felt it all without turning around. She felt the weight of eyes on her back, pressing into her spine. She felt herself shrinking under it. Her baby let out a small cry, not loud, just enough to cut through the silence. It wasn't the dramatic cry people notice. It was the weak, needy sound of hunger. Her chest tightened. She adjusted the strap, rocking slightly, her body moving on instinct. "Please," she said again, this time barely audible. "Just the formula. I don't need the rest." She pushed aside the loaf of bread, the eggs, the cheap cereal. All she wanted now was the one thing her baby needed to survive. Behind her, someone muttered something under their breath. It wasn't meant to be loud, but it didn't need to be. If you can't afford a baby, the sentence didn't finish, but it didn't have to. The message landed anyway, sharp and cruel. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. She stared at the counter instead, at a small crack in the plastic, like focusing on it might keep her from breaking. Slowly, carefully, like she was returning something fragile, she placed the can of formula back on the counter. The metal made a soft clink that sounded too loud in the quiet store. She slid her receipt closer to herself, then stopped, realizing she didn't need it anymore. Her hand hovered for a second before pulling back, as if even touching it would be asking for too much. She forced a smile, the kind people use when they're apologizing for existing. "It's okay," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I'll just leave it." Her baby stirred again, his small hands curling against her chest, searching. She closed her eyes for half a second, just long enough for the pain to show, then turned away from the counter. Empty-handed. The line shifted forward behind her immediately, relief washing over faces that hadn't been the ones humiliated. The world moved on. But at the end of the aisle, someone hadn't moved at all. He stood there quietly, a man in a tailored coat that didn't belong in a discount grocery store. The fabric was clean, heavy, expensive. His shoes didn't scuff the floor. He hadn't spoken. Hadn't sighed. Hadn't checked his watch. He had watched the whole thing from a distance, unseen, unnoticed, like a shadow pressed against the shelves of canned goods. He watched the way she held herself together with nothing but pride and will. He watched the way no one stepped forward. Not one person. As she passed him, their eyes met for a brief second. Hers were glassy but strong. Not begging. Not angry. Just resigned. Like this wasn't the first time the world had told her she didn't matter. Something twisted deep in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. He had rooms bigger than this store. Cars worth more than everything on these shelves combined. He could end this moment with a swipe of a card and not feel it in his bank account at all. And yet, for the first time in years, standing there in that quiet aisle, he felt powerless. She pushed through the automatic doors, the cold air rushing in around her like a punishment. The doors slid shut behind her, sealing the moment inside. The cashier went back to scanning items. Beep, beep, beep. The music resumed. Conversations picked up. Laughter returned. Just another delay in the day, already forgotten by everyone except the woman outside and the man who couldn't move. He stood there staring at the spot where she had been, his reflection faintly visible on the glass of the freezer doors. He thought about how easy it was to ignore suffering when it didn't look like you. How quiet dignity never gets rewarded. How silence can be louder than cruelty. And as he finally took his first step forward, one thought pressed into his mind, heavy and unavoidable. If he walked away now, he would never forget this moment. And if he stepped in, nothing would be the same again.
The cold outside the store was sharp enough to bite through layers. Naomi sat on a chipped wooden bench, her thin jacket doing little against the January wind. The baby nestled against her chest, shivering beneath a blanket that had seen better. "Dace," she rocked him gently, whispering, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry," though he was too small to understand. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the hum of traffic and the distant wail of a siren. Naomi's life had shrunk to this small bench, this tiny moment of defeat. 26 years old, widowed, a life derailed 2 years ago when a warehouse accident had stolen her husband, leaving her to carry the weight of bills, jobs, and a baby all at once. She had fallen fast, a free fall into a world that didn't pause for grief, that didn't pause for struggle. Every day was a balancing act on a knife's edge. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights flickered over the polished floors. Shoppers moved past the shelves like ghosts. No one lingered. No one cared. Naomi's empty formula can sat on her lap in a small paper bag she had grabbed. The last attempt at feeding her son today. Inside, she debated on her phone. Who could she call? Who could she ask for help without swallowing her pride? No one answered. Either she couldn't reach them, or they were too far away. Pride battled desperation in her chest. The pride that had kept her upright after her husband died. The desperation that now trembled like a storm cloud, breaking through the defenses she had built around herself. She tried one more time, her fingers trembling as she typed, erased, typed again, but the screen remained empty. The loneliness of poverty was a heavy, physical weight. The billionaire watched from the glass doors, a quiet shadow against the store's bright interior. He didn't intervene yet. He had the power to do anything, but he didn't. He only observed. There was something in Naomi's posture, the slump of her shoulders, the way she carried her shame like it had been tattooed on her skin, that struck him. In his world, money solved every problem, opened every door, erased every obstacle. Yet here, it was meaningless. Watching someone treated as if survival itself was a crime felt like a hammer against his chest. He had seen inequality before, yes, but this personal, human humiliation was something else. He didn't step forward yet, but he could feel the knot of anger rising inside him. Naomi finally stood, pulling her baby close. She had made a decision, small, desperate, and humiliating. She returned to the store, not to buy the formula, but to ask the manager if she could leave her ID and come back tomorrow, hoping for a small reprieve from a world that seemed determined to strip her dignity. The manager looked at her like she was an inconvenience, a shadow that had crossed into his bright, sanitized world. "We don't do that here," he said, the words clipped, cold, and final. There was no softness, no empathy. The security guard stepped closer, his bulk imposing. He didn't speak, but his presence was a silent accusation. Hunger and poverty, in this world, were treated like crimes. Naomi's shoulders slumped under the weight of invisible chains. Her baby cried, that sound high and piercing, and it cut through the murmurs of shoppers like a spotlight. She held him closer, rocking him, wishing she could vanish. Wishing the world would let her vanish. Then he stepped forward. Not with a flash of wealth. Not with a card, a check, or a bribe. Not even a name. Just a calm voice that cut through. The cold, the shame, the store's sterile air. Why is it so easy to embarrass someone who's already on their knees? His tone was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that made people pause. The manager's scoff faltered. "Sir, this isn't your business," he said, indignation curling around his words, trying to reclaim authority, but the billionaire didn't flinch. He looked at Naomi, at the trembling baby, at the way her hands clutched the ID like it was a lifeline. Then he looked back at the manager. "You're right," he said slowly. "This isn't my business. But what happens next is," The pause hung in the air, heavy and pregnant with meaning. No one moved. The hum of the store seemed to fade. Naomi barely looked up. She had been invisible for so long, used to the world ignoring her, treating her like she had no voice, no claim to space, but something about the quiet intensity of the man in the tailored coat made her heart lift, just slightly, in hope and fear. The store felt smaller suddenly. The fluorescent lights felt harsher, the air tighter. The people who had walked by her just moments ago seemed distant, irrelevant, as if a lens had shifted and focused solely on this fragile mother and her quiet observer. The security guard, for the first time, hesitated, unsure of whether to enforce rules or moral judgment. Naomi's baby cried again, and she held him closer, whispering that it would be okay, though she didn't know if it would be. The billionaire stepped closer, closing the distance between observation and action, but still careful not to overstep, not to overwhelm. He spoke again, this time to Naomi, softer, almost a whisper. You don't deserve this. None of it. Not the glares, not the shame, not this cold judgment from people who've never walked in your shoes. Naomi froze. The words seemed to press against the icy air, tangible, solid. She dared a glance. The man's eyes met hers, calm, steady, without judgment, without expectation, just recognition. For the first time in hours, maybe days, maybe years, someone saw her, not the failure, not the single mother, not the woman struggling to make ends meet, but her humanity. The manager, still defiant, cleared his throat. Sir, if you have nothing to purchase, then you should leave. The words were sharp, defensive. But the billionaire shook his head, slowly, deliberately. No, what you're doing is wrong. You're teaching the wrong lesson here. Not to a child, not to a mother, but to yourself. There was silence. Naomi felt it, a weight lifting slightly from her chest. The store was still busy, still humming, with fluorescent indifference, but in this small corner, time seemed to pause. Her baby's cries softened, as if sensing the shift. Then he gestured to the formula on the counter, the can she had abandoned just moments ago. This should be yours, he said simply. No explanation, no justification, no grandeur, just a simple truth. Naomi shook her head, embarrassed, overwhelmed. I can't, she stammered, feeling unworthy of such attention, unworthy of intervention. But he smiled, gentle but insistent. You can, you must. You're doing everything right. Survival isn't shameful. Asking for help isn't a crime. And in that moment, the harsh fluorescent lights, the indifferent shoppers, the scowling manager, all of it, faded. Naomi reached for the formula, her hand shaking, and held it close to her chest as if holding a lifeline. Her baby stirred, rooting, and for the first time that morning, she felt the fragile, flickering spark of hope. It wasn't just about formula. It was about dignity. It was about being seen. It was about being treated like a human being, not a failure. The billionaire stepped back, a quiet guardian, letting her reclaim the space she had been denied. As they left the store together, Naomi walking with a mixture of awe and disbelief, the billionaire remained at the threshold, watching, silently, reflecting. He had money, power, influence, things that moved mountains, things that could buy anything, but he realized in that icy, humbling moment that the true power was in witnessing humanity, in standing against injustice, in giving dignity when the world refused it. Naomi's shoulders lifted, her baby calm against her chest, and she took a deep breath that seemed to carry away months of shame and exhaustion. The lesson lingered, quiet but profound. Wealth and power are meaningless if they are not used to protect what is right, to restore dignity where it has been stripped, to recognize humanity in those the world is quick to forget. Naomi would remember this moment, this strange, quiet man, the only person who had made the world pause long enough to acknowledge her struggle, and the billionaire would remember the stark truth. Being human is worth more than all the money in the world, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness, at the right time, can shift everything. He walked through the automatic doors, and the cold light of the store didn't seem to touch him. There was a calmness in his steps that demanded attention without asking for it. Naomi didn't notice at first. Her mind was still tangled with shame, hunger, and the small, soft weight of her baby pressed to her chest. But then she saw him, moving with quiet purpose. His tailored coat, brushing past the aisles, and a subtle shift happened in the air. Even the fluorescent lights seemed dimmer in comparison. He stopped at the shelf and, without hesitation, began picking up every can of formula, then diapers, wipes, baby food. His hands moved with precision and care, as though each item was sacred eat, piece of sustenance, a silent rebellion against the way the world had treated her. The cashier's mouth fell open. The manager straightened, spine stiffening, eyebrows raising in disbelief. This wasn't a customer who had come for a sale. a promotion, or even a favor. This was someone redefining the rules of the space. The man carried the groceries with quiet authority, placing every single item on the counter. There was a tension in the air, a stillness, a collective breath held by everyone around. Naomi's heart thumped in her chest, a mixture of fear, confusion, and disbelief. When he slid his card forward, there was a soft beep. Approved. Instantly. No hesitation, no scrutiny. Just relief. Simple and profound, flowing through the space like a current. Then, the moment that no one saw coming, he didn't stand tall, didn't demand applause, didn't lecture the manager on morality. He knelt. Right there on the cold tile floor, eye level with Naomi. The action itself shattered the room. People froze, unsure what to say. How to respond to a billionaire kneeling in a fluorescent-lit aisle, on the same level as someone they had silently judged for years. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "Not for you." France's voice was low.com/carrying weight without being heavy. Tears spilled down Naomi's face before she could stop them quiet, shaking sobs. The kind you cry when you've been strong for too long. The kind that comes when pride finally collapses under relentless pressure. She had tried to appear strong, unshakable, but the years of struggle, the nights of worry, the endless weight of responsibility, it all came rushing out in that single, unguarded moment. He handed her the receipt, but it wasn't finished. It wasn't just paper and numbers. It was a promise, a first chapter in rewriting a story that had been written for her by hardship alone. Naomi's hands trembled as she took it, unsure if the world had actually shifted or if she was imagining the kindness. But he didn't stop there. Outside a black car, waited, polished, silent, unobtrusive. He guided her there, carefully, as if not to rush her, as if every small step mattered. He asked about her life, not with a reporter's curiosity, not with the detached interest of a philanthropist checking boxers. He asked to know. He listened, really listened. No interruptions, no assumptions, no pity. He absorbed her story, every detail, the long nights, the impossible bills, the quiet mourning for a husband who would never hold his child, the relentless anxiety that had become her shadow. Naomi spoke, and for once, it felt like someone was hearing her. Then he made one call. The tone was calm, commanding, not a beg, but a directive. By the time the conversation ended, Naomi's world had shifted in ways she could hardly process. A month's supply of food was arranged, her rent was prepaid, and an interview was scheduled. Not charity, not a handout, but a real opportunity. Flexible hours, childcare support, the kind of chance that could let her breathe again, the kind that could let her stand tall without shame. She stared, barely believing. Her baby stirred against her chest, and for the first time in weeks, a small smile touched her lips. The store manager watched from the window, pale, a tight knot of guilt settling in his chest. He had seen power misused, ignored, flaunted, but he had never seen it wielded like this. Quiet, precise, moral. It wasn't wealth that had stunned him. It was choice. The choice to bend the rules for humanity, to break protocol for dignity, to kneel when the world demanded standing. Naomi turned to thank the man, words failing her, voice choked, but he only nodded. Simple, quiet, a gesture more profound than any speech. Then he spoke. Not about money, not about fame, not about himself. Some time, he said softly, eyes meeting hers. The measure of a person isn't in what they own. It's in what they choose to do when no one is watching. Naomi nodded, overwhelmed, taking in the weight of the truth in his words. She had felt invisible, judged, humiliated, treated like survival was a crime. But here was someone choosing to protect her dignity in a world that often forgot the fragile and the meek. Finally, only after the groceries were packed, only after Naomi had steadied herself, only after the first breath of hope entered her chest, did he introduce himself. His name was known across the country. His wealth had built cities, funded skyscrapers, shaped economies. But in that moment, the headlines didn't matter. The money didn't matter. The power didn't matter. What mattered was the choice, the act, the quiet defiance of injustice. His true legacy in that instant wasn't the empire he had created, was the recognition that compassion, humility, and humanity were far more transformative than gold or land. Naomi clutched her baby, still trembling, still in awe, still processing. She realized something profound. Power could be cruel, but it could also be a shield, a protector, a tool to restore dignity when the world tried to strip it away. The billionaire had shown her that true strength wasn't measured in status or bank statements. It was measured in courage, the courage to kneel, the courage to listen, the courage to act when no one else dared. As they walked out, Naomi's baby settled against her chest, finally calm, a small piece following him like a shadow. She looked at the man beside her, the silent guardian who had intervened when no one else would. and she felt something shift inside her. Not just relief, not just gratitude, but recognition. The world wasn't entirely cruel. There were still people who saw, still people who chose to act. Still people willing to share the weight of suffering instead of ignoring it. The lesson was unspoken but clear. Cutting through the cold air like a beam of light, wealth is meaningless. Without empathy, influence is hollow without compassion, and power is only truly noble when it is used to protect the vulnerable, to uplift the overlooked, and to honor humanity in its most fragile form. Naomi would remember that day for the rest of her life, the day that power changed sides, and she was no longer invisible. She was seen, she was valued. And for the first time since her husband died, she allowed herself to hope not just for survival, but for a life where dignity could coexist with struggle. The billionaire watched her go. A faint smile on his lips, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest. The store faded behind them, the fluorescent lights dim and irrelevant. The world outside continued its motion, oblivious to the small revolution that had occurred in aisle 5. But for Naomi, for her baby, and for anyone paying attention to the choices that truly define a person, a seed had been planted. Compassion could move mountains. Humility could topple judgment. And one small act of moral courage could alter the course of a life. Sometimes, the strongest power isn't the kind that builds cities or commands armies. Sometimes, the strongest power is the kind that chooses kindness when no one else is watching. And in that aisle, on that day, power had changed sides. Humanity had won.
The story spread fast, not because of a name that built skyscrapers, not because of a fortune that had reshaped cities, but because of dignity. Naomi's dignity. Quiet, unshakable, the kind that doesn't need applause or recognition. She had never asked for fame. She had never sought headlines. All she wanted was to feed her child, to keep him alive, to give him a chance she hadn't always been given. Yet the world couldn't help but notice when a mother's courage met the quiet intervention of a man who knew the power he wielded and chose humanity over pride. The videos went viral, the posts were shared, but it wasn't the billionaire who held the attention. It was Naomi's small, trembling, triumphant presence. She carried herself with a dignity that refused to be diminished, even by judgment, humiliation, or poverty. Weeks passed. Naomi started her new job, a position designed not as charity but as opportunity. She arrived on the first day nervous, unsure if she belonged, but also carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had survived what most couldn't imagine. Her new manager met her with respect, her colleagues treated her with curiosity and warmth, and her child was no longer the fragile weight of worry pressing against her chest. Naomi's shoulders lifted gradually with each passing day, the weight of survival easing into the rhythm of stability. Her smiles became more frequent, genuine, the kind that touch the eyes, the kind that tell a story of resilience. Her baby, once pale and soft, now cooed and laughed, a small being thriving because someone had chosen to see his mother when the world had only judged. Months passed. Naomi grew taller in spirit and body. Confidence replaced the constant fear, small joys replaced the constant stress, and she no longer flinched at judgmental glances. The groceries from that day were a memory, but the lesson remained. She had been lifted without losing herself, helped without being humiliated. And somewhere deep in her chest, she carried a quiet gratitude, not to wealth, not to money, not to fame, but to the recognition of her humanity. Every day, she reminded herself, survival is not shameful. Asking for help is not weakness. Strength lies in rising again, in carrying on, in showing up even when the world has tried to erase you. One late afternoon, a soft winter sun cutting golden lines across the street, the billionaire returned to that same store. Quietly, as he had observed Naomi weeks earlier, he stepped inside. The fluorescent lights flickered, and there was a moment of silence, a small pause in the rhythm of everyday life. The manager, once stiff and imperious, straightened awkwardly, guilt evident in his posture. The cashier shifted, unable to meet the eyes of anyone in the aisle. Something had changed. The energy of the place felt different, charged with the memory of what had occurred months before. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it was there, the lingering shadow of dignity asserting itself over judgment. The billionaire did not speak immediately. He walked slowly, taking in the surroundings, noting the shelves, the lines, the people going about their ordinary tasks. He stopped in front of the manager, who swallowed, throat tight. There was a tremor in his hands, the kind that comes when pride collides with shame. The billionaire looked at him calmly, with no threat, no accusation. "The way you treat people when they have nothing," he said slowly, evenly, "says everything about who you are." His words were soft, but the weight behind them pressed down like the gravity of truth. No one argued. No one moved. The lesson did not need debate. It had already landed. He turned to leave, the echo of his footsteps muted against the tile floor. Naomi's face, her life, her small victories, were not part of a story to be broadcast. They were proof that compassion, untainted by ego, had the power to change everything. The billionaire did not linger to witness gratitude or applause. He did not require acknowledgement. Because the lesson had never been about money. It had never been about influence. It had been about seeing people, really seeing them, before judging, before dismissing, before assuming that struggle equals failure. Poverty was not a reflection of character. Often, it was a reflection of a world too quick to judge and too slow to help. Outside, the wind stirred the edges of the parking lot. Naomi had grown stronger, her baby full of life, laughter bubbling through their small apartment, through their mornings and nights. The groceries, the prepaid rent, the job opportunity. These were tangible, yes, but the real transformation was intangible. It was the reclamation of dignity, the quiet reassurance that she had been seen, respected, and believed in. Her child thrived not just because he was fed, but because his mother had been restored in spirit. Each laugh, each milestone, each confident step she took was a testament to a world where compassion could be chosen over indifference. And the billionaire walked away, stepping into his car, into his world of skyscrapers and boardrooms, yet carrying something heavier, more profound than any balance sheet could measure. His wealth, once a tool for influence and power, had been humbled by humanity. He had learned that true value is not found in what you possess but in how you respond when someone else is breaking, when someone else is unseen, when someone else has been forgotten by a world that measures worth in dollars and dismisses pain in silence. The story lingered in the air long after he left. The manager never looked at a customer the same way again. The cashier carried the shadow of shame in her careful smiles. Naomi, however, walked taller. She carried her child with ease, confidence etched into every gesture. She didn't need fame. She didn't need headlines. She needed dignity. And she had reclaimed it. The world may never fully recognize her struggle, but she had witnessed the rarest of things. Someone choosing to act not for recognition, not for politics, not for optics, but for the simple, radical act of compassion. That day, a baby was fed. A mother was restored. A man of immense wealth was reminded that power is hollow without empathy, influence is shallow without understanding, and success is meaningless if it cannot be measured in human kindness. Naomi would grow, her child would grow, and the world around them would remember that real wealth, true, lasting, transformative wealth, is not counted in coins, notes, or assets. It is measured in the moments you choose to show up, the moments you choose to see, and the moments you choose to act when someone else is falling. The lesson was quiet, yet profound. Money can buy comfort, power can buy influence, but neither can buy humanity. Neither can teach a man the weight of shame nor the flight of dignity restored. Only people can do that. Only the choice to care, to act, to recognize another's pain, can shift the course of a life, change a child's future, and remind a world obsessed with wealth that its truest value lies not in possession, but in compassion. Naomi had lived it. Her child had survived it. And for the billionaire, the lesson would echo through boardrooms, through meetings, through a life that seemed already full, reminding him that the richest currency is never money, but the humanity we share. And in that quiet victory, in that simple truth, the story closed not with headlines, but with a universal understanding. Dignity cannot be bought. Compassion cannot be calculated. Humanity cannot be measured in dollars.